Keith Fry wrote Roadside Geology of Virginia in 1986. A guy named Aaron Cross has just signed a contract to do a new Roadside Geology of Virginia. And he's going to be finished that in 3 years. Our goal is to see geology trails like this in other places around the state for the time that he prints that book. We are the first. When I went to Washington and Lee and had Edgar Spencer for freshman geology,
I did too.
and he's an emeritus professor now in his 80s, there was no such thing as plate tectonics where these continents were bashing into each other. It did not exist. And I talked to him just the other day, and he's working on 2 books that he thinks people need to have before he leaves this earth. And I can tell you, I was just excited about the natural history that he's going to present and the geology and the neighborhood he's going to present. We're going to have his books. So there was no such thing as plate tectonics. In 1974, the Rockfish Valley Fault was discovered. Before 1974, nobody knew it was there.
Tell them what it is, Peter.
And what you're going to have to do is to wait to go over to the trail with these guys and their hammers and the world outside, and then you will see that Wintergreen Mountain and Israel Mountain, which used to be 14,000 to 17,000 feet high, and now only 4,000 feet and maybe 2,000 feet, that what happened to them? 2 things happened to them. 1, they filled up with gravels, and 2, they weathered and threw all the gravels down into the pit. So the valley got filled up with gravels, with all of these different rocks. It got filled up with them, and then we get some dirt on top of that and what have you. But that's where our water has gotten trapped. That creates our aquifer, so that's where we get our water. And so we've got these richness, this valuable water out here that the breweries and the wineries are so attracted to. And it's all because of this weathering process. I had no idea when Chip went out and found his rocks, and we will be breaking these things open, that he's got 3 rocks that are basically the same, but they've gone through different processes, 100 million years different.
Yeah.
You know? Yeah, they are. 3 rocks, and right out of the river. And you didn't go very far. I mean, did you go 20 feet to pick up these rocks? 20 feet, you get rocks that are that different in age. So we've got a lot to learn. The trail guide that you have is for self-discovery. But what we're going to do now is to go over there to the trail and start working our way with the rocks. We'll be on the fault. Everybody wants to know a little bit about the earthquake, right? You know, so I think before we go, it would be nice. Who's the earthquake expert?
Well, I'm the base person.
All right, Eric, can you do a couple of minutes about the Rockfish Valley Fault and the earthquake that was in Cuckoo in Louisa County?
Okay. Well, that was an interesting event. We have had a lot of construction on campus at JMU, particularly as you get right before the school year starts. Then they're frantically trying to do everything. And that day, we were all sitting in the office. We're in a ground floor office, and we all felt this low rumble that we thought, oh, another big construction truck. And yet, the frequency was too low, and it lasted too long to be a construction truck. And one fella then calls out into our office bay, hey, I think we're having an earthquake. So what's the first thing that we do? We you think we'd run outside? And
Smaller.
yeah, well, we don't have one in the department, but we logged on very quickly to USGS, and sure enough, there had just been an earthquake. And so there actually is a very neat service that they have right now called Did You Feel It? Where you can actually put your location in, your exact location, and say what was happening at your house. It has all these questions. Was there any damage? Did your dishes get shaken off the walls? And so on. And so, of course, we all very quickly put in that information. Well, I also have a very good friend. She actually teaches at William and Mary, but she and her husband have a house between Louisa and Mill. And I did not know if she would be in her office or not, so I tried to call on a landline, not a cell phone, but a landline, and got an out-of-service signal. Some hours later, she did call me on her cell phone to say she was in Williamsburg. She was going to go check out her house very, very soon after that, and I said, well, be careful, because the intensity of this earthquake was enough that you probably will have some damage to your chimney and probably your foundations. And that's the most important thing. Everyone gets hung up on the magnitude of the earthquake, which is how much energy is released in the particular break. And really what you have in the earthquake itself, in this particular instance, it was what we call a reverse fault. So it's slightly tilted and one part is slightly lifted up. But it's not a smooth plane. It's more like rocks being locked together. And as stresses build up, they pop. And that's the energy that's released. It's that big release of energy that is the magnitude of the earthquake. What's probably more important to people is the intensity of the earthquake, and that's the actual damage. I mean, lots of factors are going to affect how that energy and the magnitude is distributed, where it goes, how you feel it in different areas. I thought it was interesting, Washington, D.C., which is further away than Harrisonburg is from the epicenter, actually felt more of it than we did, which is just fascinating in that sense. So lots of factors affect that, how that energy moves. But how your house shakes, whether your dishes are falling off the walls, your bookcases are collapsing, your stove dancing away from the wall. This is what happened to my friend. She called me up a few days later and she said that, sent me pictures first of all of her stove, which was now 4 inches further away from the wall, which was a large cast iron stove. All of the bookcases in her study had collapsed. And she said the 2 chimneys on her house, one definitely needs to be rebuilt, and the other is now leaning away from the house. The flashing doesn't match up anymore. She said there's not a foundation or chimney in that area that didn't sustain some damage. And that's where it really gets interesting, is the intensity, how that energy affects you locally. And, you know, so when we focus in on what's called a Mercalli index, modified Mercalli index, that's where the real rubber hits the road and our relationship with the earth. Do I understand what's going on? Do I understand what I need to do to keep from being hurt next time? Now, one of the things that's really interesting that's come up is particularly all the aftershocks. There's been quite a few aftershocks. I mean, I don't know how many there have been since the actual event. Something in 20 was the last count I heard. Has anybody heard higher? Yeah, somewhere in that neighborhood. None of which have had the same level of energy. None of which have had the same intensity. Some have been quite sizable, and I don't know how many of you have felt some of those aftershocks here as well. But what is interesting about that, the question I get asked is, well, was that big one, was the 5.8 the one that we felt, and all these aftershocks, does that mean we're going to have an even bigger one coming along? And actually, what those aftershocks mean is everything's just sort of settling out to a new equilibrium. You had a lot of energy that's built up, and it's been released very quickly, and then all the other surrounding areas have to compensate. They have to adjust. They have to make adjustments. It's sort of like having a room full of chairs and you push a whole bunch of them on one side and all the other chairs have to adjust to keep their position. The geology in that area is complex. Parts of it used to be an island arc, much like Japan would be today, a volcanic arc. And so you have different kinds of rock. They have been all metamorphosed in manner similar to these rocks here. They've been changed, they've been twisted, and they've also been broken. There's lots of little faults in through there. So with that release of energy in the big earthquake, we should expect lots of adjustments all around there as everything settles out to take up the change in position. So.
Do they have an estimate of how far down the epicenter was?
Yeah, or the epicenter is going to be at the surface, but the focus itself, the initial earthquake, I think was something like 3.8 miles down.
3.8 miles, and they're saying there've been 24 aftershocks, and it is the largest instrumentally recorded earthquake in the eastern United States in the last 100 years. So, I mean, it's, the aftershocks were felt, the quake was felt as far away as Montreal, Detroit, Toronto. But we got a fault, the Rockfish Valley fault. This, and you can't see this very well, this came off the internet, and it's a picture of the Louisa area, and all these red lines are faults that are in that area. Apparently Louisa is really weak with fault lines. And we've got the Rockfish Valley Fault, it's 200 miles long. Why they named it Rockfish Valley Fault, I don't know, because certainly that's not 200 miles long. But why don't we go ahead and go over there